Hello and welcome to this interview. This interview is a part of an interview series that I'm doing with the contributors for the book Autism and Buddhist Practice. And the interview series is where I speak with the contributors and we talk about their life before and after diagnosis, how the Buddhist practice is, and then we talk specifically about the topic that they have written about in the chapter. And it's meant as a support and a help for autists to hear how Buddhism can help in managing everyday life when we feel we're like a square peg in a round hole. It's also meant as an educational series for Buddhist centers and Buddhist sanghas and Buddhist communities to learn more about autistic Buddhists and how they can make their center or sangha or community more attractive and available for autists. And today I have Pete Grella with me. And Ivy. Yeah, thank you very much for clarifying, Pete. I'm happy about that. Thank you very much. You have written chapter 4 in the book that is called True Freedom, What Buddhism Teaches Us About Differences and Acceptance. And I love your chapter. And we're just clarified with both of us that we have a 5-hour maximum window that we can talk about, because I do think we have a lot to talk about in today, because you have so many things that are really, really relevant that I would like to talk about. First, I would like to hear about your life before and after diagnosis. You have a really, very, very emotional, I find very emotional description about how it was for you to be a child, and then up until you got the diagnosis. You have some interesting conversation about empathy that I also would like to dive into. Then I would like to hear about your Buddhist practice, because you're very interested in anatta, the non-self, which I am too. You have some amazing insights about how you use Buddhism regarding right speech, and how you use Buddhism regarding metta. You have an amazing story about how you used Buddhism at a concert when you were almost, ready for a meltdown. So I would like to hear about the Buddhist practice. And for the topic that I would like to talk about, it's that sensation of just not fitting, of suicidal thoughts, about meltdowns, about all that, where it's just a sense of being disconnected to the world. That's a topic that I would like to talk about. So that's what we hopefully are going to talk about for the next 5 hours.
Okay.
First of all, I would like to hear about your life before and after diagnosis.
Okay. Yeah. In American television, we have something called PBS, which is Public Broadcasting Service, and I saw like a short commercial they did about autism, and they showed these children on a playground, and the autistic kids were in like this glass box, separated from all the other kids playing around. When I saw that, this is before I knew I was autistic, I thought I can really relate to that, what's going on in that image. And I remember one time when I was a kid, maybe around 12, 13 years old, looking out the window and see the other kids playing in the street, who I knew, who I've hung out with before, but I didn't know how to go outside and join them. I just didn't know how to do that. And I felt like something was missing, like everyone else got this handbook on how to interact with other people that I never got. Yeah. But I never considered myself autistic, because at the time I was born in 1962. And when I was young, autism, the only known autism was the nonverbal kind, which I was not. And so I didn't really think about autism, but I knew I was different in some way. And I kept thinking, if when I die, I would like them to do an examination of my brain, because I would think they would find something different about it. And I kept asking myself growing up, why does my life seem so much different than everyone else's? And I was seeing a therapist, and she told me to explore autism and Asperger's syndrome. And I went on Wikipedia, and they had like 8 different characteristics, and I had like 6 of them. But the ones I didn't have, they said that autistic people didn't have an imagination. And I could play Dungeons and Dragons and write songs. And I go, well, you know, I have an imagination. And they also said autistic people couldn't read facial expressions. And I can read obvious facial expressions, like I can tell if someone's smiling or frowning. But I discovered through online tests that I can't read microfacial expressions. When I would try to do that test, I would fail miserably. But anyways, I was, how I came to think that I was autistic is I started reading blogs by what other autistic people wrote. And when I would read what they wrote online, I could have written what they had written. And that's when I thought, gee, I might really be autistic. And I started taking online tests. And the online tests were, I would score at the borderline. Let's say the test would say, if you score 30 to 60, you're probably autistic. I would score 30. And I would do that over and over again, kind of at the border. So I still really wasn't sure, you know, if I was autistic, neurotypical, halfway, what's going on. And, but then after reading those blogs, I really thought, well, whether I'm autistic or not, my life has been affected as if I was autistic. So
that's a good point.
So I thought, well, and I thought this might really be the answer. And if that's the case, it explained a lot in my whole life. I remember one time I went to my doctor in my medical plan, and the American healthcare system is so much inferior to the European one. That my doctor was at a methadone clinic because I had an inexpensive health insurance. And I'm glad there's a methadone clinic, but like I told her I wanted to get a diagnosis, and she was like, well, why do you want to do that? She was like arguing with me. And it made me think about it. And I thought, well, I want a diagnosis because I would ask myself, am I like, and this is something some of your other interviewees have brought up, like, am I a quote unquote normal person who's done very poorly, or am I like a handicapped person who's done very well from the cards I've been given? And if I am autistic, I concluded part of the wall between me and the rest of other people has to do with nonverbal language, nonverbal communication, differences in eye contact and body language and things like that. And that's what I'm going to have to look at. But if I'm not autistic, that just means I'm an asshole. And I have to, you know, change.
You're jerk. You're jerk.
Exactly. So maybe I'm an autistic asshole, but
so have that opportunity. That's true. That's true.
So I actually called some places up to try to get an official diagnosis. One place quoted me $8,000. And they said, oh, but we have a discounted plan for $5,000, which is,
oh my God,
the average price. Because normally insurance pays for it or government pays for it, and they do brain scans and all kinds of stuff. And there was no way I can afford that. But then a few years ago, this organization called GRASP, which is an Asperger's support organization, started offering online diagnosis for $750.
Oh, wow.
So I signed up for that.
Yes.
And there was like maybe 5 multiple choice tests and a couple of in-person interviews. And I went through that, and they said, yes, they diagnosed me with autism spectrum disorder without intellectual disability was the official diagnosis.
Yeah.
And before it was kind of like I wasn't borderline. I truly was autistic. You either are or you're not.
Yeah.
But the thing about the test, it like I mentioned before, I thought the differences were like my nonverbal communication. But the written questions went into all aspects of your life, like how you present yourself, how you take care of yourself in your home and everything. And the one question that stood out for me the most was, they asked, how much do you clean up spills? And I said, most of the time, because I clean it up most of the time. But apparently most people clean them up all the time. Occasionally there will be a spill, especially if it's not a wet one. I'll just look at it and say, fuck you, I'm not going to clean it up. Especially after that question, I was even more defiant. And it made me realize it's more than just nonverbal communication. It's how you present yourself. Mm-hmm. My wardrobe is 95% jeans and t-shirts. That's all I wear. And my house it's not a mess, but it's not clean. Like that's my bed back there, you know, it's halfway made, you know, but and I never realized like how much of an impression those kind of things I just don't care about affect other people.
Mm.
So kind of the diagnosis kind of made me think, well, it's really daunting if I really try to be a neurotypical, be accepted by neurotypicals. I should just accept there's going to be this difference.
Yeah.
And so that's what it was like before and after the diagnosis. It was like, you know, growing up, I kept asking myself, why, what's going on? And I no longer ask that question. Now I know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm what's called in philosophy a materialist, in that I believe it's kind of like dependent origination. Everything that happens is affected by what came before that.
Mm.
And I also, there are philosophical debates about whether we really have free will, whether free will is an illusion. And when I first heard that debate, I thought, of course we have free will, of course. But then when I heard scientific arguments, neurology about it, you know, about how we make our decision in the subconscious. And what's really interesting is I saw this one, a lot of my scientific knowledge comes from two shows. One is called Closer to Truth, which is a PBS show about this neurologist trying to find out whether there's a God or not, but he talks to philosophers and scientists. And this show by the actor Morgan Freeman, Through the Wormhole. And they one of the segments on one of those shows, they talked about how the brain makes decisions. It's similar to how a beehive makes decisions, because bees will go out looking for nectar. And when they find a flower with nectar alike, they'll go to the hive and they'll start doing a little dance, which communicates the location of the flower and the quality of the nectar. And different bees will come in doing their dance with the information. And then the other bees in the hive will join one of the other bees. And the bee with the dance with the most bees is the flower that the hive will go fly off to. And it turns out our brain makes decisions in a similar manner. When we're confronted with a decision, our neurons will start to fire, and different neural networks will fire depending on different aspects of the decision. And the neural network, which has the most firing, is a decision we ultimately make. Let me get a drink of water.
And also that happens so much later, you know, that we have there's made a really interesting study called the I Work Card study. I don't know if you know about that, where there like red cards and blue cards, and the red card, your money is deducted from you, blue cards, you're getting money. And it's like the measurements that was made, that when the person thought, aha, I know that I'm getting money when I pick the blue card, that is like way down the line when the frontal lobe realizes that, because but you have had like dilation of pupils, you have had perspiration in your hands, you have had elevated heart rate, so many things before the frontal lobe actually realized what is going on. There's absolutely no free will whatsoever. We're completely what we believe there is. Yeah.
And how I find that very helpful when I was talking about how neurotypicals are going to react to me in a certain way, I now realize they can't help it. You know, they are just as much controlled by their brain wiring as I am, and how I respond I am. So it makes it easier for me not to take things personal. You know, when people, like I've had people say to me like, my mom thought there was something wrong with you because you rock back and forth when you're standing. Another person told me you're rocking and shaking, which makes me think I'm making you nervous and I want to get away from you. And I shake and rock even when I'm completely relaxed, you know. And I think that's a big part of the thing neurotypicals misinterpret our behavior. And I shake and rock because
eye contact. Yeah.
The physics of autism is that parts of our brain and nervous system are more densely wired than they are in a typical person. So it's like there's extra energy traveling through our body, and the shaking and rocking just dissipates that extra energy that we have within us. It's nothing like, it can be deceiving because our mind might interpret that as being nervous when we actually aren't nervous. We just have this extra energy, you know, traversing our system.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a really interesting talk with Louise about that. That for me, and also with Danny for that matter, for me to do a meditation, I need and to get to the same point the neurotypical people they get by sitting still. I get to that point by rocking. Just like when I'm chanting, if I can't do a full Stevie Wonder when I'm chanting, I'm not there where the neurotypical people they are. Yeah.
Yeah, that brings up
Yeah, go
something
on.
I want to say about the Buddha. His lived, if we are to believe the stories, he was a prince, grew up in a royal family, grew up in the most validating way. All of his needs were taken care of. He was cherished and loved and thought of as a great person, even as a child. So, and then when he started his spiritual journey, he started off at this level. And because he started off at this level, he was able to figure out enlightenment. Now, I did not grow up in a way where I felt validated, and I don't think most autistic people do. And so I'm not trying to get to where the Buddha ended up. I'm trying to get to where the Buddha started. That's my.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You talk about eye contact, the issue with eye contact. Could we circle back to that?
Yeah, I growing up, it was difficult for me to make eye contact. And there was one philosopher who said, and this is not applicable to autistic people, but we know other people by knowing ourselves. And I thought, well, everyone has difficulty making eye contact. But I kind of noticed everyone did it and it was kind of expected of you. So I kind of forced myself to do it, and I could do it. I wasn't comfortable. It got to the point where it was just mildly annoying, it wasn't that big a deal. But one day I was at my Sangha at the time, and we were talking about retreats. And the retreats we would do would be in noble silence, where there was no eye contact and you don't speak to other people, which is my normal disposition, But he was talking, saying, yeah, you can't make eye contact or talk to people. And he says, and it's really hard to do. And I was shocked. I didn't know people actually enjoyed making contact. That was the first time I heard that. And I go, oh my God, that really, and it explained a lot, but one thing I've learned about eye contact that I'm still working on, now I can force myself to make eye contact. Now, one of the reasons I think it's difficult for autistic people to make eye contact, I've noticed for many autistic people, including sometimes myself, speaking is a challenge. It takes a lot of brain power for us to speak. And for neurotypical people, while they're speaking and making eye contact, they're taking in information from the person's face, expressions and whatnot. Now, for me, even when I'm listening or talking, it's much easier for me to look at the ground. I'm listening or talking because I need to dedicate on my brain power to formulating what I need to say. So now I can force myself to look people in the eye when I'm talking, but I'm really not taking in any information of reading their space, reading their face. I'm trying to do that at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons why we have difficulty talking, like I'll have pauses many times, is like I mentioned earlier, our brain, in a neurotypical brain, the wiring of the neural pathways is consistently dense. And when we speak, different parts of the brain are used. When we speak, when we formulate a word, the different parts of the brain come together and form that word. And other different parts of the brain communicate at a consistent speed because the density of the wiring is consistent. But in an autistic brain where it's inconsistent, parts are more densely wired and parts are less densely wired. Sometimes, the information from one part of the brain would get there before, and you have to wait for the other part to get before, then we can speak. It's like on a web page is loading, it'll load up halfway, then there'll be some bit lost in the internet, and you have to wait for that to come up, then the rest of the page can load. And that's kind of how it is for us when we talk, because of the inconsistent brain wiring. Not all the information gets to the proper point together at the same time.
Yeah, I also think that there's something else about it, and it's about how we are as autists. For example, what I'm saying now, I have something that I would like to say, and then I say it, and that if we're talking about something that I'm really, really interested in, it's turning into an autistic monologue. And you don't need to say anything or do anything. Just sit and for 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about my special interest, and you just sit, right? Neurotypical people, they don't have that. And they very much look at the other person to see how what they're said is received. And if there's any kind of recognition, so they can continue talking about. And then they also want to involve the other person in it, where we're not interested in that. I have loads of information. Sit down, Pete. I'm going to talk. That's how we talk. When neurotypical people, they have that back and forth, that reflection. And even I have experienced some neurotypical people, they open their mouth and start to talk without knowing what they want to talk about, but they figure out along the way why they read and the ping pong and that. And
I can't comprehend that when I say
no. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think it's for us, how another person is interacting is disrupting our monologue. Like I was just disrupting you just before, and it completely throws you because your brain goes blank, and then you need to get back on the path, on the monologue that you were talking about, where for neurotypical people, they say something and they pick up on one another. So it's like that ping pong, which we don't really do. So you saying anything or doing something or going like, may I interrupt? That is just disturbing. It's just disturbing. I'm in the middle of a monologue.
Yeah, a data dump. That like my latest special subject is bats. I've learned as much about bats, so I can go on and on about bats if you want to do that sometime. But yeah, I used to view speaking as a tool to communicate facts and data.
Yes.
Come to a common ground on facts and data. And I would think neurotypicals would be happy to when I would download my information. But it turns out, and I had to be told this, I read this wonderful book. I don't remember the name. It was an ebook on Amazon written by an autistic man about explaining how neurotypicals communicate. And I had a therapist tell me that you connect with neurotypicals through an emotional bridge. And when neurotypicals communicate, it more has to do with creating emotional bridges. And they're also much more group oriented, trying to figure out what the group thinks. So I've learned that what most people want to hear is when they say something, they want to hear back from you. It's called reflective listening. Reflect back to them the emotional content of what they said, so they know that you've heard it. And this is something for many of us autistic people, we can, it's a form of masking, but it's for neurotypicals, these things are hardwired and automatic. For us, we have to learn and remember, and we can replicate it, but never as well as for someone that's hardwired. But it helps to learn these things, and learn what's going on. So yeah, reflective listening helps. And another thing, neurotypicals being more group oriented. If there's a group of people and there's someone expresses a question, there'll be kind of a feeling out to find out what the group thinks. And this goes back to how we evolved. We evolved from humans who survived by being in groups of other people. So we're hardwired to want to be part of a group. And autistics, we tend to be much more individualistic and don't think about that dynamic. But yet when we find ourselves alone, it's still very distressing because we still have that deep-seated wiring to want to be part of a group. And in the modern age, we can survive just fine without interacting with people. We could have anything we want delivered to our door and whatnot. And I suppose that's, in a sense, being part of a group is being part of society. We have medical institutions that will take care of us, but we still don't have that personal connection. And being part of the group, that's its members. So people will be much more friendly to a member of the group, even if they don't know, because if you're part of the group, you kind of share the same values and opinions. And when the group communicates, they're trying to figure out what the opinion is, even though it may not be factual, which is, we see this today in our politics and whatnot, is because people will believe things that aren't factual because it's part of their group dynamic. And to try to get people to change their mind by facts, if they change their mind, it's not just changing their mind on this issue, they're going to be rejecting the group, which is, I don't just comprehend that, but that's how the typical one works.
It's exactly something that I really would like to circle back to, because when there's a group of people, then they, like you say, they're neurotypical people, they're ping-ponging within one another to find a solution for what they want to do. What we do is research. And when we then say, we download all the information to the poor people, and all of it is facts,
Right.
There's no opinion in it at all. I have no opinion about bats, at all. So whatever you tell me will be all facts.
Right.
And that goes the same for which restaurant should we go to. Neurotypical people talk about what they feel like, what they would like to eat. What I would look at is, distance, reviews. I would read all the reviews for every single, look at the menu, see what additives that they have in it, in the different foods and all that. That is what so my decision would be based on facts, not an opinion about anything. And that is one of the biggest hurdles that I have had in my life with socialization, is that people think that I'm sharing my opinion. I'm not. I'm very, very factual. I actually don't really know what I have of an opinion about something. It's very, very factual based. Yeah.
Yeah, opinions are tied to emotions, and for me and for other autistic people, I notice our emotions are either all or nothing. Most of the time I'm not feeling anything and everything's fact-based. But when I do feel something, it's very intense.
Yes.
So when I do have an opinion about something, I've been told I'm very opinionated.
No, but I think it's because that most times when we say things, we're right.
Yeah.
So there's no debate about it. You can't bend facts. Facts are facts, and I just tend to be the one always being right. I do see an issue. I do see where the issue can happen with that completely. You also have where you talk about seeing patterns and about smelling more. Could you talk about that? Because both of them are like such a description of me.
Yeah. One of the Sangha I used to belong to, it's called Against the Stream. We'll go back when we talk about that. I'll give that story. It's a very interesting story. But they would have a carpet on the floor, and I would stare at the carpet, and it would look like hand-painted patterns, and I would try to find imperfections in the pattern, and I would find, like, oh, right there, that dot is on a different space than it is on the other side of the carpet, things like that. And with smells, I remember one time I was at my mom's house for some holiday, and we had some pizza, and they put it in the oven to keep it warm, and I noticed something burning, and one of the pizza boxes caught on fire. But I was the first person to notice. I just, something's burning, the pizza's on fire, just little things like that.
Yeah.
Certain smells, like drain paint and new car smell, just make me nauseous.
Yeah. I have the same also with E numbers in food. A lot of E numbers in food really make me nauseous as well. Yeah. Then you were at the doctor, where you talked about emotions. You thought that you were really, really good at reading emotions, because if somebody's dog die.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to a therapist, and we were talking about empathy. And I said, yeah, I'm empathetic. I know what empathy is. When somebody tells me their dog dies, I know they're feeling sad and I should respond appropriately. She said, yes, Pete, that's true. But there's another part of empathy. Neurotypical people can feel what other people are feeling. And I'm saying, what, are you shitting me? You mean if someone says their dog died and they're feeling sad, you start to feel their sadness? I had no idea. And it made a lot of sense. I was at one conference and I explained it this way. Let's say you're at a party, and at the party above everyone's head is like a light bulb. And the light bulb shines and vibrates. And it shines and vibrates according to the person's emotions and feelings. And I can't see that light bulb. Everyone else can see each other's light bulb, but I can't see it. I'm blind to that. And people can't see my light bulb too. I know, I notice I can read other autistic people much better than I can read neurotypical people. And I think it's vice versa. So that's what it's like. And it made me realize, because I would be like in groups of people at parties, and people seem to be communicating in ways that I was blind to. And it made a lot of sense. You know, now I know what's going on. So yeah, and after I had that talk with my therapist, she said, well, try to find times when you actually do feel other people's feelings and try to cultivate that. And occasionally I will notice times when I do feel other people's feelings. Like a friend of mine had a common friend who passed away, and I sent her a picture of that friend, and she was telling me, oh, how much she misses her. And I felt sad for her. One time I was with my mom, and I showed her a picture of my sister who passed away, and she got really upset. And I got really upset too, because I didn't want to make my mom upset. But another time I was at a party, I volunteered at a cat shelter, and one of the cats passed away. It was like the mascot cat. And I was talking to the owner of the cat, you know, about the cat, and she started tearing up, started crying, and I felt nothing. And this is a time, this is a time I know when other people would feel something, and I'm feeling nothing. So I now notice the differences. And I've seen other autistic writers talk about, if it's someone close to you, you know, that you know really well, you're much more likely to feel their feelings than, you know, strangers. Like other people, I would hear stories, other people would be upset. Like I read this book, and someone who worked at a hotel told someone on the phone that their friend had passed away who was staying at their hotel. And the clerk telling that person was crying, even though that person was a stranger. And I just don't understand that. You know, it's like, that's a stranger. Why are you so upset? But that's, I remember as a kid thinking, everyone seems so emotional. You know, are people gonna think I'm some sort of monster if I don't cry at my parents' funeral? As a little kid, I was thinking that way, even though I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that other people seemed so much more emotional than I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really important. Really important. Then how did you get into Buddhism? How did you come across Buddhism?
Well, the therapist I was talking about said, she told me, I want you to get out of the house 3 days a week. I said, okay, well, there's a yoga studio down the street. I'll try that out. I always was interested in meditation, but the only meditation I was really familiar with was transcendental meditation, where they give you a mantra, kind of a secret mantra, and you got to sign up. And I was kind of averse to that. And I saw there was a place near me, a Sri Lankan temple. Well, I might go there, but that's not really my culture. But I was scrolling through Facebook one day, and I saw the word Dharma punks. And I go, oh, what's that word Dharma punks? I know the word Dharma and I know the word punks, but I've never seen them together like that before. So I did some research and found out there was a book written by this guy named Noah Levine, who is the son of a meditation teacher named Stephen Levine. And Noah was a punk rocker from the Northern California punk rock scene. And I was into the Southern California punk rock scene. And we were, some of the bands he was into, I was into. And he had a memoir talking about how he was this degenerate psychopath punk rocker. And I bought it, and how he ended up in juvenile hall and jail. And he called up his dad, well, I'm at my wit's end. What should I do? And he said, well, meditate. So he started meditating, and he found that he was able to not be a psychopath anymore. And he started these meditation centers called Against the Stream Buddhist Meditation Society. So I found out there were 2 centers in Los Angeles, one in Santa Monica, one in East Hollywood. And I tried to get someone to go with me. and I couldn't get someone to go with me. So after a few months, I finally got enough courage to go by myself. And I went there and I saw people wearing punk rock t-shirts, lots of people with tattoos. The teacher had a bunch of tattoos, Mary Stankiewicz was her name. And I thought, oh, I can hang here. And they talk about what they call secular Buddhism, where they just focus on the part of the Dharma which talks about how the brain works.
Mm.
And that's what I liked about it. And the Dharma talks were mostly, had a scientific basis to them. And so I started going there and meditating, and I liked what the teacher said. Then there was this class they started there called Connect and Sustain by a teacher named Pablo Das, where we would go there and they would have like hot seats where you sit in the seat and everyone could ask you questions, and a council where you could sit up and talk. And before that point, it was very difficult for me to get up and talk in front of strangers because I was very self-conscious. And I knew I was different. I used to think I can't let people get to know me, because they would find out, if they got to know me, they would find out there was something wrong with me and they wouldn't want anything to do with me. And one of my first therapists said, no, that's the wrong thing. You have to open up. So when in this Connect and Sustain class, we would talk. I would go and talk in front of people, and I realized people didn't condemn me. It was a safe space. And the more I did it, the easier it became. Like what I'm doing right now, I couldn't have done 10 years ago, just talking like how I am right now in front of you or in front of other people. But now going through all that, I saw one of your videos how most people, you think you're the center of attention, but you're only the center of your attention. Everyone else is the center of their own attention.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I realized. And it makes it easier for me to speak in front of people. And you mentioned anatta, non-self. Another thing that makes it easier, and Eckhart Tolle was a big influence on me on this, like approaching your life from the point of view, not worrying about what other people think of you. And the non-self concept is we have this self that's kind of a story created by labels and whatnot. And that's the self that worries about what other people think of it. But who we truly are is just this consciousness in the present moment. So now, like before I would if I was going to go to a party or do some speaking before Buddhism, I would get nervous and self-conscious and think about it. And then afterwards, I would evaluate myself. And now I know that thinking about the past and the future just interfere from the present moment.
Yes. 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 And it's also such a good point. What I really enjoy about anatta is also it's also the knowledge about that, that whatever I think is reality is just a thought. Whatever I feel is reality is just a feeling. What is reality is a sensory experience without a label. So it's the hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting and feeling. That's reality. The rest, everything I add on it, that's just thought and not reality at all. And it really, really sets me free. As an autist, it really, really sets me free, because there's no overthinking anymore. There's no need. It's just, entertainment.
Yeah.
It's not real at all. And my goodness, overthinking and autism, that's like,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a story. And we have many times, many autistic people have an ability to grasp on something and hold on it and really think about it and examine it, like with bats in my case recently. And that's useful. That was useful when I was studying math at college, to study mathematical theorems, go over it and understand them. And when I do my computer programming, trying to solve an algorithm, whatnot. But it's not good when I try to figure out, well, why didn't that person text me back? Then it gets out of hand.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not what the mind is designed to do. The mind is designed to learn everything there's to learn about bats, or reading all the suttas, or computer programming, or do math, or send a spaceship, into orbit. That's what the mind is used for. It's not used to to ruminate about past and future and why did that happen and all that. It's not designed for that at all. Not at all.
Yeah, the brain appears to want to be always thinking. And it turns out that kind of like how computers have an area of memory used for calculating, our brain has that too. In autistic people, that area is larger than in a neurotypical brain. So that is why we can more deep dive into something. But it's one of the reasons why we rock, because like a simple conversation for neurotypical may take up all that memory space. Or for us, it only takes up part of that space. So we need some other stimulation to fill up the rest of that space. It could be in the form of rocking, or like if we're like if there's a lot of conversations going on, we're going to be focusing on the other conversations while we're trying to focus on the other conversation, because our brain needs more input. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up, we have that story, and then we have the present moment focus. And my goal is to everything that we experience manifests as some sort of physical sensation in the body, and emotions manifest in the body. And ultimately, like when I was depressed, I would like examine it. I would be like a pressure behind my eyes, and I would think, this isn't physically painful. You know, the physical sensations are quite mild, but it's still so damning, you know. And I came to the conclusion, if we just examine what we experience as just how it physically manifests in the body, and like taking an equanimity approach, where if we can accept all physical sensations as equal, then we could stop running away from the feelings and sensations we don't like, or chasing the ones that we want. If we could just sit in the physical feelings, which mostly aren't that bad, and if we can get to the point where we can accept them equally, then that's kind of like the ultimate goal.
Completely. It's such an important point. That there's such a difference between the sensory experience that we have, for example, of depression. The sensory experience of that is actually not that bad. It's all the labels on top of that experience that completely makes the entire experience of depression horrendous. But in itself, the sensory experience is just a contraction, which is completely doable, you know? Yeah, super important. Okay, so you became a Dharma punk, and then what?
Well, I attended Against the Stream regularly for many years, for about 10 years, and I edited their podcasts, which was very useful because I would listen to it and learn from the podcasts. You know, I edited, you know, over 100 podcasts of various teachers. And I would go on retreats, you know, day longs, and the more I meditated, there's a quote, tribute to Viktor Frankl, where when we meditate, it creates a space where we can decide. And I found that the more I observe my breath and observe my thoughts, like one example is when I would do computer programming, sometimes I'd make a mistake, and I would have a meltdown. I'd get really angry because I would have to redo my work, and I would automatically go to it. But then after meditating, when I would make a mistake, I had the ability to observe the meltdown coming on and have some volition. And now most of the time I could say, no, I'm not going to do that, because I could remind myself of the negative physical effects that I would experience after. But sometimes I will still go there because I think I'm so angry, I have to go there, you know. So there's that. So I was going to Against the Stream. And then their teacher, Noah Levine, was accused of some bad behavior. and there was an LAPD investigation, and there was a long investigation, and they ended up closing down, and which was kind of traumatic. I don't think I've really come to terms with that fully. But one thing I've always wanted to do is, one time when I was at Against the Stream, I asked one of the teachers, do you have any other teachers who have experience with autistic people? And they asked around, you know, at retreats or whatever, and there was no one that had experience with autistic people. And because I wanted an affinity group that I could go to. And I thought, well, if there isn't one, I'm going to have to start one. And I started, you know, and when Against the Stream folded, there was another Sangha called Insight LA, which a lot of the former Against the Stream teachers went into, and some others went into something called the Meditation Coalition. So I contacted them saying, I want to do this neurodiverse affinity group. And they hooked me up with one of the teachers there named Lizette Paley, who wanted to do the same thing. And about that same time, they offered every few years, they offer a meditation facilitator training. So I said, oh, so I signed up for the training, which was a year-long training. So I did that. And normally they really are trying to become more diverse, because Inside LA has a reputation of being like upper middle class white people, and they wanted a more diverse. And the last thing they wanted was another middle-aged white man meditation facilitator. But since I was autistic, I was able to, you know, get into the program. And so I did the program, and I, through them, was able to create a group I call Intune LA, where it's a neurodiverse affinity group that's been going on for the past year. And it ranges from like 1 to 6 people. And some of the meetings have been very fulfilling, because some of them attendees, they're like 19, 20 years old, and they're going through the same issues that I've gone through at that age. And they're able to talk about it. And I'm there, someone else who's gone through it, who has some insight to it, and they don't feel so alone. And I have insight that they were not able to get, you know, on their own. So there's been some very fulfilling meetings, some of that.
Amazing. I would like to link to that in the description of the video. So for everybody interested, I'm going to link to that in the description. Great. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So are you connected to a Sangha now?
I guess Insight LA would be the one, but I don't, ever since the meditation facilitator training, there's one Sangha I go occasionally. I haven't been in a couple months, called Autistic. That it's an online one, because when everything went online during the pandemic, I found this Northern California autistic sitting group, which they used to just meet in person. But when they went online, I was able to, I started attending them and went on one of their retreats.
Amazing. Amazing. You have a really nice view into let's see, which of them do I want to talk about, because you have so many good things in the chapter. I can warmly recommend anyone to read the chapter. It's really, really good. Could we talk about the meta practice? Let me just find the page.
Yeah, meta practice is repeating phrases of well-being, because normally, you know, we have the negative dialogue in your head. And after doing meta practice, saying, may everyone be at peace, may everyone, I started to having those positive phrases in my head. But one time that it became very useful, I was at a concert once, seeing one of my favorite black metal bands, and they went into one of their signature songs, and a pit broke out. And I inadvertently got pulled into the pit, and I fell down. And I couldn't get up because I'm old. And but someone helped me up. But it kind of triggered me. It spooked me. Now I have a condition called atrial fibrillation, and I didn't know it at the time, but it's where my heart beats irregularly, and I start to have low blood pressure, and I start to pass out. So I went to the back of the club, and I could tell an AFib was coming on because I start to get really hot. I start to get really sweaty, and I started to get tunnel vision. And I knew I was passing out. I said, well, if I make it to the lobby, I can lay down and write it out. Because in the past, when it's happened, that's what I can just lie down and wait till my heart stabilizes. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, but then I feel normal. So I started to make my way towards the lobby, and I noticed the thoughts I had. Normally in those situations in the past, I would have thoughts like, oh, what's wrong with you? Can't you maintain? You're not fit to go out, you know, things like that. But this time I had thoughts like, this is an inevitable part of your existence, because I thought it was related to my autism. This will pass. This is temporary. Don't worry about what people think. And made it much easier to deal with. And the only reason I had those thoughts is because of the meta meditation, create a new brain wiring. And so I made it to the lobby, was able to lie down. The doorman that was there, who was actually pretty nice, and gave me a chair. And then after about 5 or 10 minutes, I could tell my heart stabilized. I started to feel normal. Then I can go back inside and enjoy the rest of the concert.
Beautiful, beautiful. You have another one, another explanation where you talk about observing your thoughts. You have where you write, I practice observing my thoughts and not being attached to my thoughts. I imagine my thoughts inside a bubble, and rather than being inside the bubble, possessed by my thoughts, I try to be outside the bubble, observing my thoughts. Is that part of observing?
Right. That was an instruction that my teachers would do, and that I found it very helpful, because normally when we would have thoughts, we identify with the thoughts, we believe the thoughts, and we would believe we would have to react to the thoughts, respond to the thoughts. In fact, I used to believe that if I wasn't thinking and analyzing what's going on in my life, that I'm wasting my time, that I should always be thinking about what's going on in my life if I want to improve my life. That was my attitude. And I really like this teacher, Gil Fronsdal, who I believe is from Northern Europe also. He would talk about the space between the thoughts. Yes. The whole perspective of, we don't have to think that our existence, you know, between the thoughts, not thinking, is a viable existence, that we aren't wasting our time when we're doing that, was so eye-opening. And I found, like, by observing our breath, when we meditate, we observe our breath. We can meditate our thoughts the same way. And we also can do it the same way if we have a physical pain in our body, to just kind of think of the pain in a bubble and step outside it and observe the characteristics of the pain. The whole idea of, that's what Eckhart Tolle would talk about, the duality of the mind, you know, the observing part that would observe what the mind is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also about the gap, where Viktor Frankl, where he says that between stimuli and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lie our growth and freedom. That's what I call the gap, you know, where we have like the ego on one side, where it's just the super egotistical, and then we have, you know, the other side that is the opposite, and that duality in between there, we have the gap. And that is where the true freedom is, where there's just, you know, being. There's no opinions, there's no preferences, there's no expectations or anything, that just is, you know, that space there. Beautiful. Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, and the meditation kind of expands that gap.
Yeah.
And one way, one of my teachers put it is like, our mind normally starts out like a pond, and our thoughts are like rocks dropping into the pond. And when the rock drops into the pond, it creates a big effect in the pond. But when we meditate, that pond expands into an ocean. So when the rock drops into it, it has much less of an effect. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, really, really good example. You have another where you talk about the thinking mind, where you talk about how you deal in social situations. where you used to get super worried about and walk over, ruminate about how you're going to manage the social situation, and obviously all of us know that no matter how much you think about it, other things are going to happen, and it's going to completely throw you, and that can either push us into a shutdown or into a meltdown. But then you talk about how meditation has helped you with that thinking mind. Could you go into that regarding social situations?
Yeah, it never goes how you imagine it.
Never, ever, ever, no. Never, ever, no.
Yeah, I used to get worried, and just by meditating, focusing on your breath, because I find when you focus on your breath, you can't focus on your thoughts.
Mm.
And so if I'm going to a party or some social situation, now I can focus on my breath. And I also realize that all that thinking and rumination does no good. There maybe if you think about it once or twice the first time, volitionally, there might be something useful, but beyond that, it's not useful. So I just can focus on my breath before I go. And then when I'm in a social situation, I'm reminded of this show, again, I saw on PBS. It was a half-hour show where they interviewed autistic people. And they interviewed this one autistic woman who was talking about small talk. And she was saying, you know, when she's waiting in line at the market and someone wants to talk to her, her response is, "What's going on in my head is far more interesting than anything you have to say to me," which I can relate to, you know. And when I tell neurotypical people that, they say, "You're an asshole. Don't tell people that," you know. But like I used to think small talk was, the purpose was to be a stepping stone to a more meaningful conversation.
Yes.
And when that didn't happen, I would feel I did something wrong. Like if someone wants to talk about the weather, I would hope it would lead to a discussion on like hurricane, the effect of climate change on hurricane and tornado formation, something deep. And when it didn't lead to that, I thought I felt I did something wrong. But this woman on the TV show was saying that her dad told her, yeah, for neurotypical people, small talk is actually a good thing. It gives them energy. It makes them feel better. It's like on those games, like there used to be those games on Facebook where you would grow crops. And if you grew a crop, you would get some points. You would earn some points. And for neurotypical small talk, they earn points, energy points, even though for us, we lose points. But when I learned that, I thought, oh, so small talk isn't supposed to go into something more meaningful. And if I engage in small talk with a neurotypical, I'm actually helping them out. So I approach it now from an altruistic perspective. Yes. Like one time at Against the Stream, there was on the street behind it, it was all covered with trash because there was a storage space behind it and people throw trash over it. And so I said, well, we should go clean up that trash. So we created a day where we went out there and cleaned up all the trash, and some of the locals came out and started helping us. And one of the locals started talking to me. And in the past, I would be like, oh shit, you know, I don't want to do this. What am I going to say? You know, what is he thinking about me? You know, but I learned, you know, that small talk actually helps. So I just engaged with him and smiled and just politely responded. And he seemed to enjoy it, and he went off in his way. And it really made it so much easier. And I really believe I helped enrich this day a little bit.
It's such a beautiful way to see it, Pete. I really, really love that a thing that you really, really struggle with. You see that okay, you can do this, you know, altruistic. You can recharge the person, and that is what the small talk is about. And then you spend time recharging, and that is, you know, the bodhisattva deed for the day. I love that. I love that. For me, I also struggle with small talk, and I have exactly the same as you. I think that small talk is just, you know, the initial chit chat to get to the real stuff. And then when people don't get to the real stuff, I get confused. But then what were we just doing? You know, or if I start to info dump, and that was not their intention at all, and then, you know, it just goes pear-shaped. But when I was taught that small talk is the neurotypical need for acknowledging the other person's existence, then I had the same bodhisattva feeling about that, but I can acknowledge your existence. I'm happy to acknowledge that you're here, and I'm happy to acknowledge, that you're a kind person, and I, would like for you to see that. But it's 100% something I'm doing for the other one.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's something that's not hardwired or inherent. It's something we have to remember and remind ourselves to do.
Yes. 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 Exactly.
One thing I want to bring up, we talk about how neurotypical people get recharged through small talk. And we are the opposite. Like, I find that I have a finite number of words in me. And if I'm like socializing all day, I'll reach a point in the evening where I just can't talk anymore.
Yeah.
I become silent. And then after about an hour, I can start talking again, but I've lost my filter. And I start saying stuff that offends people, or people say stuff, oh, he doesn't really mean that, and things like that. And in a way, it's because I can't mask anymore, right? And I kind of enjoy the things I say. And when I was young, I didn't know better and would say those things, and I would see the look of horror on people's faces. I kind of had to learn. So now I can, mask and regulate to a certain point, and then I can't anymore. And then the next day, I find I have to just stay home all day.
Yeah.
Not go out. Once a week, there has to be one day where I just stay home and don't go out, so I can recharge.
Yeah. I completely relate to that. Completely relate. And also to everything you just said, I completely relate that when I'm super, super social, I reach a point where I go mute and I can't say anything else. And then when I start to recharge, then there's a point until I'm fully recharged that where I, like you, have absolutely no filter. And I usually say to people and warn them that I'm a cactus, so don't talk to me, don't touch me. And if you do, well, it is, a very, very prickly yeah, it is a very, very prickly cactus. It's there's no filter. There's no filter. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I have so many more things. There is yeah. You talk about where was that? The attachment regarding work and free time.
Yeah, when I would have my meltdowns after I would make a mistake in my computer program, I would ask myself, why is this happening? Why am I having this meltdown? And I started thinking about it, and I cherish my free time. I'm self-employed, so I can, work 20 hours a week and meet all my obligations that way and have as much free time as possible. And when I would have to redo my work, that would eat into my free time. And I saw that I had this attachment to that free time, which was causing me this suffering. And that's what the Buddha talks about. We have suffering, we have attachment to things we want. And when I didn't get it, I would get very upset. So seeing that, I can now observe why I'm upset, which would mitigate the feelings. And another thing too, I would ask, well, why at the root of many of these feelings is an unrealistic expectation. And when I would make a mistake, I would get angry because I made a mistake. And I had this unrealistic expectation that I'm never going to make a mistake. I never want to make a mistake. And then when I saw that, I realized, well, I should not beat myself up for making a mistake, because I'm never going to be perfect, So now when I make a mistake, I remind myself of that.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk also about the equanimity, about fully accepting whatever arises, which is also part of the Buddhist. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, one of a big influence on me is the teacher Philip Moffat, who he had this book called The 9 Bodies, about different states of consciousness. And he's one of the teachers at a place called Spirit Rock, which is in Northern California. And I always wanted to go to Spirit Rock, and teach with Philip Moffat. I saw he was doing a retreat there. So I signed up. It was a 9 bodies retreat. I didn't know anything about 9 bodies, but I went. And it was this book, how I was influenced by this Indian spirit guy who talked about the different states of consciousness. And he would talk about different lower and middle and upper bodies. And one of the lower bodies, he would talk about the emotional body, which is how we feel emotions in our body. He would talk about the vital body, which is kind of like how much energy or lethargy we feel within our body. And he would talk about the physical body, which is what we would feel from our sensory stimuli. And when we have emotions, especially negative emotions, we feel them in our body. And by exploring these 3 different bodies and being in these different bodies, we can shift between them. Like if I'm feeling a strong emotion in my body, I can shift to like, what sensory am I feeling? Am I feeling the wind, the heat, and kind of stuff? And that gets me out of my physical body. And this is an approach of like accepting things as they are, being equanimous towards whatever we're experiencing in our environment. This is a tool to help us do that, because most of the time we're in our emotional body and we want to run away from that negative thing or run towards that thing that makes us feel good. So if we can just start sensing what we feel outside our body or within our body, independent of our emotions, that helps us get away from that and be more equanimous in our approach to life.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Let me see what else. Yeah, well, I think we have talked about that yeah, the part about neurotypical people, so many things that they find super easy that just take a lot of time for you, and that comparing mind that is happening where you always come out on the losing. And I would like if we can talk more about that. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that was more like growing up. I would see people move in and out of personal relationships and things like that, make friends and new friends and all the time. And I just didn't do that. And I didn't know why. And I wanted those things in my life. And I would compare my life to other people and make judgments that would make me feel bad about myself. And it was the anatta, the non-self, that where I realized that comparing mind is about the stories. We're comparing our stories, and it's just that, it's a story. Mm-hmm. And it made me, in the idea of seeing us as just the consciousness in the present moment, made me realize I don't have to be in that comparing mind all the time. Now, unlike some other people, I don't dismiss that story completely, saying that it's completely meaningless, because we do use it in our life and it serves some purpose in living our life. But now I realize that's not the only perspective. It's like, the blind man and the elephant. There's different blind people and they touch different parts of the elephant. And one who touches the snout thinks it's this long thing, and another teaches the body, thinks it's a large thing. And now I realize there's different perspectives. We can view how we look at the world. And there's that story, then there's the consciousness, just the consciousness experiencing the present moment, and knowing that because the thing about depression, it's the nonstop, constant rumination that brings you down.
Yeah.
And if you can break that up in some way, that helps you get out of it. So that's what I find very useful.
Yeah. You talk about the immensely high suicide rate that is in the autistic community compared to the neurotypical community. Could we talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like diabetes in a way. There's 2 different kinds of diabetes. diabetes runs in my family. Both my brother and sister had the kind that it's genetic. Well, it has nothing to do with your diet. And there's the other kind that if you eat too much sugar, your insulin regulation system goes out of whack. It can no longer do that. And I think many studies have shown that the thing that makes people the most happy is personal connections, emotional connections with other people. And autistic people, I have seen studies where one study is autistic people make a negative first impression. You know, neurotypical people have a negative first impression of autistic people just because of our differences in body language and eye contact and whatnot, and the monotone speech and the flat facial expression. It turns out that I have a flat facial expression, and that's the least popular facial expression. People would rather have an angry or a negative expression because at least they can read it. And they're confronted with a facial expression they can't read. They're like blind. And that's just how it is. We have, in America, there's this term resting bitch face. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Yeah, I got it. I'm the queen of the resting bitch face.
That's how we are.
Yeah.
And we aren't sad or depressed or tired. We just don't have the wiring for the same type of facial expressions. So we don't make the same kind of impression on people that another person who's hardwired to smile does. And I think the same way that eating too much sugar overstimulates the insulin regulatory system, so much social rejection overstimulates the serotonin and dopamine regulation of the brain. And I think that's what leads to depression in autistic people. It's not so much that autism itself causes the depression, is that so many failed social interactions overstimulates the serotonin and dopamine system that it no longer can work properly, and it leads to depression. And another thing that happens is that I mentioned how my emotions are either all or nothing. And I think that's related to two parts of the brain are more densely wired than normal, so that when I do feel something, it gets amplified. So when we feel negative thoughts, it gets amplified, and that overstimulates the system. So yeah, the statistics show that the suicidal rate is something like 3 times higher, at least, than the neurotypical population. The only population which has a higher depression suicidal rate is manic depression, because by definition, 100% of people with manic depression are depressed.
Yeah. You said something, I forgot to write it down. It was really good. Really good.
Now I have found, I've tried 4 different antidepressants before I found one that really worked. And I think one of the things that worked, it's working on top of the meditation in my Dharma lessons, which makes it more effective. But I take now something called Cymbalta, because before antidepressant medication, it was like a sledgehammer. I couldn't feel anything, and I would rather feel depressed than feel nothing. And my head would feel like it's like a balloon about to pop. And I don't like it. They would work at first, but I realized it was fake. I would rather to be happy because of my accomplishments or, you know, something I've actually done. But the Cymbalta is a lower dose and it's time released. So instead of feeling it all over my head, I just feel it on the back of my head, which I can deal with. And it's much more wild, and it makes it much more mild, and it makes it easier for me to see the positive things in my life. The negative things are still there and always there, and I always think about them. But there's always the positive things, which it makes it easier for me to focus on. And this whole experience of the book and doing the class, you know, is creating connections and positive reinforcement. Like one of the parents, one of the attendees of my Intune emailed me. They just got the book and they said how much they like the chapter and whatnot. So there's
amazing. Yeah, what I'm teaching a lot is that finding the joy of experiencing, because every single experience is not only good or only bad. Even depression, there's a joy of experiencing, not the yay, I'm depressed, but if we really, really really zoom into it, really zoom into it, you can find a joy in everything, in every single experience, because nothing is ever static. Nothing is ever only one thing. But we are so hardwired or coded into thinking that things are either positive or negative, and they're not. There's something useful in everything, and in that you have the joy of experiencing. Yeah.
Right.
What I wanted to say before that, I've remembered it now, is that that what I have experienced in my life, what you were talking about with neurotypical people being really, really good at socializing and really good at reading one another and really good at, liking one another right away because they have that mirror in one another, and we just, don't gel. We're not in the middle of the room talking with everybody because there's too many sensory experiences. So we're either, at the outskirts of the room or in the kitchen. That's where you find the autist. So therefore we don't really gel like normally, and then we mask to try to fit in and all of that. What I have experienced in my life is that I don't have an issue with my autism. I don't have an issue with me twirling my hair, and I have no issue with me rocking, and I have no issue with the way that I dress. I have no issue with that, but I'm very, very much aware of how big an issue neurotypical people have with me. And that is where the masking is happening. It's not that I have an issue with me, but I know what a burden I am to them. So therefore, I'm trying to be less me. That leads into, shutdowns and burnouts and being mute, and, and here we go again on another one on the roundabout, And I think that is what is so difficult to get out of a depression, because you don't fit. No matter how we twist and turn it, you do not fit. Rocking and twirling and dressing, like we do, is it doesn't fit. Wanting only to work 20 hours a week because you don't really spend any money and that's enough for you, and so why work more? And you'd rather, volunteer at a cat shelter. It's like the choices we make in our lives are so unusual, so unusual. And it's not that so much that we have an issue. I spoke with Chris and he has an issue, but I know that a lot of autists, they have an issue with who they are. But we are also some that have absolutely no issue whatsoever, but we are very much aware of the burden that we are, how much an issue other people have with us. And that depression, to get out of that, just not fitting and just not being liked for who you are, that's a big one. It's really, really a big one.
Yeah. When I look at my autism, like just me, I got no problem with it. Except there may be some like GI issues, some sensitivities in my body that I don't like. But like when I listen to music, I can really focus on it and really enjoy it in ways I know other people can't enjoy it. And same with just like a stand-up routine. I just saw this new Chris Rock routine, and I can really get into the humor and laughing. The problem with autism is how it affects how we relate to the neurotypical world. That's where the problems are, not individually how it affects us. And I think that's related to how I talked about earlier, how we are descended from humans who survive by being part of a group, and we find ourselves isolated and not part of a group, we feel very distressed. So a big part of Buddhism, I have found, and this applies to neurotypicals, is trying to overcome some of our original programming that doesn't do us good. Like take the emotion of jealousy. People who are jealous and possessive are more likely to pass along their genes than people who are nonchalant. So jealousy is kind of, that trait got kind of passed on to us, but it's a negative emotion. It just makes us feel bad. It doesn't do us any good. And when I look at life in general, whoever created all this, it seems that what's best for the species is more important than what's best for the individual. And a big example of that is mortality, dying. Mortality is not good for the individual, but it turns out it's good for the species, because when I think I saw this through that show, through the wormhole I mentioned earlier, that this one gamer created two simulations, one with a population that was immortal and one that would die but was replaced by offspring that was slightly better adapted to a changing environment. And the environment would slightly change, and the immortal population, when the environment would change, could not adopt and would slowly die off. But the population that would die, the offspring could better adopt to the changing environment. So it turns out dying is beneficial for the species, but it's not good for the individual. And there's all little things like that, like jealousy and a lot of our emotions and desires that we have are good for the species, but they cause problems, bad feelings in the individual. And a big part I found in meditation is to try to overcome that initial wiring in the program we came with.
Yeah. 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 I think actually that was everything that you have written in the book to talk about. Do you have anything? Let me just look at my notes here. We talked about everything. We talked about everything. Do you have anything that you would like to add?
Just one thing about bats.
Oh, go on. Go on.
Bats can fly better than anything that can fly. And there's 3 reasons for it. Bats' wings, it's their hands, and it's made out of skin, as opposed to birds' wings, which are feathers, and the air can flow through feathers, but skin is airtight. So it makes their wings more efficient. And another thing is when birds flap their wings, the left and right wing flap in unison, but a bat can flap their right and left wing independently of each other. They can flap one faster than the other one, which gives them more maneuverability. And another thing, the Latin name for a bat is Latin for flying hand, because their wings are their hand. It's their fingers outstretched. So they have their fingers in the wings, and they can manipulate their fingers in their wings while they're flying, changing the aerodynamics of their wings. So that gives them the most maneuverability of anything that can fly.
That is amazing. Amazing facts. Do you think we can tie that into Buddhism somehow? It would be something about the adaptability of that, the way that bats also navigate.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are no fixed views. There's no fixed self. We think we have a fixed self, just like a bird wing is fixed, but be more like the bat, where we are variable and we don't have to remain fixed in this. We aren't fixed like a bird wing. We are flexible like the bat wing. And besides that, that's not our true self anyway, and we can, and the bats kind of they fly like this. And that's how we can go through the world. We don't believe we have a fixed destination. We can let the world flow with the world.
Love it. We managed it. We managed to weave bats into a talk about Buddhism and autism. I love it, Pete. I love it. I actually think I had decided that I am gonna read the last part as the last part of it's the last part of your chapter, where you say the angst of autism comes from a friction caused by trying to fit into a neurotypical world. Buddhism releases me from that angst, and that is true freedom. And I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And if I'm ever going to do a talk about bats, I know who to call.
All right. Yeah, there's a lot more.
Yeah, I bet. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pete. Thank you.